In the fascinating history of deception and fraud, there exists a clear hierarchy that criminologists have studied for generations across every culture and continent. At the very bottom, you find the petty thief, driven by impulse and desperation, snatching purses and stealing whatever can be quickly converted to cash. Above him, you encounter the armed robber, a predator who uses the immediate threat of violence to separate victims from their belongings. Higher still are the bank robbers and sophisticated heist artists, who require meticulous planning and specialized tools to breach vaults and security systems. But at the very pinnacle of this pyramid stands the confidence man, the true artist of deception. The con artist doesn't carry a gun or wield a crowbar. His weapons are far more subtle: a disarming smile, a perfectly tailored suit, and an understanding of human psychology so profound that he can convince intelligent people to abandon all logic and caution. He doesn't steal from you, he persuades you to hand over your money willingly. Among these masters of deception, one name stands above all others in criminal history, a man so audacious that he didn't just steal money or jewelry, but successfully commodified a national landmark that defined the silhouette of Paris itself. His name was Victor Lustig, and this is the true story of how he sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, not once, but twice, to two different businessmen who never suspected a thing. To understand how such an absurd feat was even possible, we must travel back to Paris in the summer of 1925. This was a city of dazzling contradictions, a metropolis still healing from the wounds of the Great War while dancing with reckless abandon toward an uncertain future. The Paris of 1925 was not merely a city, it was a living organism in constant transformation, a place where tradition collided with modernity on every street corner. And it was about to meet its perfect criminal match. The Great War had ended 7 years earlier, leaving deep physical scars on the landscape of northern France and even deeper psychological wounds on the generation that survived the trenches of Verdun and the Somme. But from those scars emerged something new and vibrant: the Années Folles, or the crazy years. This was a decade of cultural explosion, artistic revolution, and desperate hedonistic release that swept through every level of society. This was the era of Art Deco, with its geometric lines and celebration of modernity, transforming everything from architecture to fashion. It was the era of Josephine Baker, the American entertainer who captivated audiences with her unbridled energy. It was the era of Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and the lost generation who filled the cafés of Montparnasse with brilliant conversation and copious amounts of alcohol. Money flowed freely, and Paris was undergoing a massive modernization program that would define the decade. However, beneath this glittering surface of jazz clubs and intellectual ferment, there ran a dangerous current of political instability and municipal chaos that most visitors never saw. Governments in the French Third Republic rose and fell with alarming frequency, sometimes lasting only months before collapsing under the weight of internal divisions and scandal. The city's administration was a sprawling, inefficient bureaucracy struggling to manage Paris's aging infrastructure. Corruption was an open secret, with rumors of backroom deals and bribes circulating as commonly as the morning newspapers. For a man like Victor Lustig, who had already spent 2 decades perfecting his craft on transatlantic ocean liners and in the drawing rooms of the wealthy elite, this atmosphere of cynicism was not an obstacle. It was a personal invitation, the perfect environment for the most audacious fraud in modern history to take root and flourish beyond anyone's imagination. Who was this man capable of such breathtaking audacity? Victor Lustig was born on January 4, 1890, in the small town of Hostin in what is now the Czech Republic, then part of the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. From his earliest years, he displayed a duality that would define his entire life. On one hand, he was frighteningly intelligent, with a near-photographic memory and an innate ability to learn languages, mastering French, English, German, Italian, and Czech with native fluency. He was exceptionally well read in literature, history, and philosophy, and he possessed the impeccable manners and effortless charm of a born aristocrat. He could discuss fine wine with a sommelier, debate politics with a senator, and charm a wealthy widow at a dinner party, all without ever breaking his composed demeanor. He was, in every superficial way, the perfect gentleman. There was just one fundamental flaw in his character that would shape his entire destiny. He had absolutely no desire to work for a living in any conventional sense, no interest in the slow accumulation of wealth through honest labor. He viewed the world not as a community with shared responsibilities, but as a vast game board spread out before him. He saw most people not as fellow citizens but as willing players who were too blinded by their own greed to understand the true rules. He believed that honesty was merely a social convention that clever men could ignore for profit. This philosophy guided him from an early age. He began his career working as a waiter on transatlantic ocean liners, but quickly realized that the real money wasn't in serving the rich. The real money was in befriending them and then separating them from their wealth through charm and psychological manipulation rather than force. Thus, the persona of Count Victor Lustig was born, a sophisticated European nobleman with a taste for high-stakes card games and speculative business ventures. These ocean liners were his university, his training ground for perfecting the arts of deception. He would spend days carefully cultivating a single target, often a wealthy, self-made businessman eager to rub shoulders with genuine aristocracy. Lustig, as the Count, would engage in polite conversation in the smoking lounge, display his wit and worldliness, and casually suggest a friendly game of cards. He was a master of the long con, playing a patient game that could last the entire voyage. He would intentionally lose small sums on the first few nights, building his mark's confidence until the businessman believed he had found a naive nobleman to exploit. This illusion was carefully cultivated and essential to the con. Then, on the last night of the voyage with the stakes raised enormously, the Count would reveal his true skill. Using sleight of hand, marked cards, or simply a deeper understanding of psychology than his opponent possessed, he would win a small fortune and then disappear into the crowd at the port, leaving his victim too ashamed of his own greed to go to the police. This was the foundation of his art. One famous anecdote perfectly illustrates his nerve and understanding of human nature. Lustig once found himself on a ship with the most dangerous man in America, the notorious gangster Al Capone. Most men would have avoided the mob boss entirely. Lustig, however, saw an opportunity rather than a threat. Undeterred by Capone's fearsome reputation, the Count approached him and struck up a conversation. He pitched a brilliant investment opportunity involving real estate development in Florida that sounded completely legitimate. Capone, always looking for ways to launder his enormous illegal profits from bootlegging, handed over $50,000 in cash without a second thought. Lustig took the money, thanked him politely, and then did something completely unexpected. He placed the entire amount in a safe deposit box in Chicago and waited. For 2 months, he did absolutely nothing. Then, he calmly returned to Capone's headquarters and asked for a private meeting. He apologized profusely, explaining that the real estate deal had fallen through due to unexpected government regulations. As a gesture of his good faith and integrity, he returned every single dollar. Capone was stunned by this display of honesty. In the gangster's world, people were killed for far less, and here was a man returning $50,000 out of principle. In gratitude and admiration, Capone peeled off $5,000 from a nearby stack and handed it to Lustig as a thank you for his integrity. Lustig had just made $5,000 by doing absolutely nothing except understanding that unexpected honesty is the most valuable commodity of all. More importantly, he had earned the trust of one of the most powerful criminals in America. He was now ready for something much bigger than shipboard card games. In the summer of 1925, Victor Lustig arrived in Paris with his trusted American partner, Dan Collins. They rented a small apartment on the Rue de Rivoli and began reading local newspapers with intense concentration, searching for an opportunity. They soon found it in the public discourse surrounding the Eiffel Tower, the great iron structure that had dominated the Paris skyline for 36 years. The tower had been built by engineer Gustave Eiffel for the 1889 World's Fair and was originally intended to be temporary, scheduled for demolition after just 20 years. It had only been saved because Eiffel installed a radio antenna at the top, making it useful for communications. By 1925, newspapers were filled with articles complaining about its enormous maintenance costs. Reporters detailed the thousands of gallons of paint required to keep it from rusting, the constant elevator maintenance, and the growing opinion among some intellectuals that it was an eyesore that had outlived its usefulness. Rumors circulated that the government was secretly considering tearing it down. Lustig read these articles and had an epiphany that would make him infamous. He wouldn't wait for an opportunity to present itself. He would create the opportunity himself. He would sell the Eiffel Tower to someone who didn't know it wasn't for sale. The plan was audacious but beautifully simple. First, he had official-looking stationery forged with the letterhead of the Ministère de la Poste et des Télégraphes, the government department responsible for the tower's maintenance. Then, he crafted a carefully worded letter inviting the 5 biggest scrap metal dealers in Paris to a confidential meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon to discuss a matter of utmost importance to the Republic of France. The choice of the Hôtel de Crillon was a stroke of genius. The Hôtel de Crillon was one of the most famous and luxurious hotels in the world, a place where government officials, diplomats, and royalty routinely held meetings. By holding his fake meeting there, Lustig added a layer of unspoken authenticity that no forged document could match. On the appointed day, 5 men arrived at the hotel, each a titan of the scrap metal industry. They were ushered into a private suite where Lustig, dressed in his finest suit and exuding the quiet authority of a senior civil servant, awaited them. He introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry, a fictional position he described with such confidence that no one thought to question it. With a solemn expression, he swore them to secrecy, explaining that what he was about to reveal was known only to the highest levels of government. Lustig explained that the Eiffel Tower, while beloved by tourists, had become an expensive liability for the city. Maintenance costs were staggering, and the structure was actually losing money every year. After months of secret debate, the government had made a painful but fiscally responsible decision: it would be sold for scrap to the highest bidder. However, to avoid public outrage and political scandal that could bring down the government, the sale had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. The ministry was accepting sealed bids from a select group of reputable dealers. The contract would go to the highest bidder, but more importantly, to the man who demonstrated the discretion to handle this delicate matter without causing public scandal. The dealers listened intently, their minds racing with calculations. 7,000 tons of iron meant a fortune, and these men wanted it badly. They looked around the luxurious hotel suite, at the impeccably dressed official with his official-looking papers, and they believed every word. They believed because they wanted to believe, because the opportunity was too lucrative to question. Greed was already clouding their judgment, silencing the small voice of skepticism that might have saved them. Lustig then took them on a private tour of the tower itself, walking beneath its massive iron structure, pointing out areas of rust with a practiced eye, discussing the logistical challenges of demolition with apparent expertise, and lamenting the loss of a Parisian icon with convincing sadness. He was so believable that none of these experienced businessmen questioned the basic absurdity of the situation. After the tour, the bids came in one by one. Lustig and Collins waited anxiously in their apartment, knowing that a single phone call to the Real Ministry could expose them at any moment. But the phone never rang. One bid stood out from all the others, submitted by a man named André Poisson, an ambitious but insecure dealer desperate to prove himself to the Parisian business elite. Poisson's bid was the highest by a significant margin. Lustig summoned him for a private meeting at the hotel and lowered his voice confidentially. He explained there was a small problem with the official process. As a civil servant, his government's salary was modest, and he had ambitions that his pay would never support. He hinted that if Poisson could provide a small commission, the contract could be signed immediately. Poisson understood immediately. He wasn't being asked for a bribe, he was being invited to join a conspiracy, which made him feel like an insider. He eagerly handed over a large sum of cash in addition to the official deposit. Lustig handed Poisson a set of forged documents officially transferring ownership of the Eiffel Tower from the Republic of France to André Poisson, shook his hand warmly, and congratulated him on his excellent business sense. Then he and Collins packed their bags and vanished from Paris, leaving behind a very happy man who believed he now owned the most famous landmark in France. Weeks passed, and Poisson, too embarrassed by his own greed to go to the police, said absolutely nothing. Lustig, emboldened by this silence, made the astonishing decision to return and sell it again. This time, a suspicious dealer went directly to the police instead of the meeting. Lustig escaped moments before the raid, but Collins was caught. The story exploded across newspapers worldwide, and Poisson was finally forced to come forward, his humiliation complete in public. Lustig fled to America, continuing his cons until his arrest for counterfeiting in 1935. He escaped from federal court in a daring breakout but was recaptured 33 days later. He died of pneumonia at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary on March 11, 1947. To the very end, he remained charming and unrepentant. He once wrote 10 commandments for con men, and rule number 1 was, be a patient listener. It is this, not fast talking, that wins confidence. His story remains a timeless lesson about the power of greed and the astonishing things people believe when they desperately want something to be true.